Welcome to the Global Current, where Seton Hall's diplomacy students give you a fresh look at what's going on in the world. I'm Amanda Noon.
And I'm Daniel Garay.
This week's news, the uptick in violence in Iraq,
Brain surgery for Argentina's president.
and shipwrecks on the Mediterranean high seas.
In analysis, workers' conditions in Qatar are raising concerns.
And a look at how the government shutdown has affected our partners abroad. Thanks for tuning in.
We hope you enjoyed the show.
I can't stand it. Wish I could stand above and replan it. To the whole world is just one love and rebrand it. There's too much I just don't know.
First up, staffer Evan Doolittle looks at the surge of violence in Iraq.
Iraq has once again been struck by a series of coordinated bombings. A week ago today, in northern Iraq, a small Shiite village of Quebec's elementary school and a police station were destroyed by a vehicle-based IED. The device killed 12 children, the school's principals, and 2 policemen, and left another 90 wounded. A concurrent blast in Baghdad killed 12 civilians and left 23 wounded. The victims of the recent bombings are added to the almost 140 people who have died violently just in October, according to the Associated Press's count. Violence in Iraq has risen dramatically over the past year. In September of 2012, 396 civilians were killed in Iraq, while in September of 2013, 1,057 civilians were killed, with another 2,133 wounded. The surge in violence is reminiscent of Iraq in 2003, plagued by sectarian violence, a seemingly impending civil war, and a U.S. occupation. While the majority of the American presence has exited, many radical religious groups and al-Qaeda affiliates remain. The majority of the bombings target Shiite neighborhoods, with mostly radical Sunni groups taking responsibility. The militant group Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, the regional branch of al-Qaeda, has claimed responsibility for the majority of the attacks targeting the Shiite mosques and business places. Some believe the sectarian divide in Iraq has become more and more inflamed with the continuation of the Syrian civil war. The conflict has devolved into a struggle between Assad's Shiite-run government and the Sunni majority. The hostilities between these two groups are now pouring over into Iraq. In Iraq, the Sunni minority is not well represented in the Iraqi government, and new laws passed target the Sunni sect because of its association with terrorist groups. The Iraqi government is taking major steps to combat these terrorist groups. To reduce the threat of car bombs and congestion at vehicle checkpoints, a limit has been created for the number of cars allowed in Baghdad. Public meeting places such as parks and soccer fields have been bulldozed. In April, Iraqi security forces removed a Sunni protest camp in northern Iraq, further escalating tensions. This week, the Iraqi government executed 42 prisoners charged with terrorism. According to Amnesty International, 68 death sentences were carried out in 2011. The 42 who were just hanged amount to almost a third of the total number executed in all of 2012. This is Arjun Donde filling in for Evan Doolittle for the Global Current.
Argentinian President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner underwent brain surgery this week. Staffer Liza Bell tells us how it may affect upcoming congressional elections.
Argentinian President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner was diagnosed last week with a chronic subdural collection by her doctors. Since that time, Kirchner has undergone surgery to remove a blood clot close to her brain. According to the Washington Post, the surgery was also designed to remove blood and relieve pressure in the brain following her diagnosis. This diagnosis and surgery comes at a particularly important time during Kirchner's presidency. Kirchner is currently campaigning for her party for congressional elections. Kirchner will have to stop her work on the campaign trail and take a leave of absence. In Kirchner's leave of absence, Kirchner's Vice President Armando Boudou will take over for Kirchner. BBC News states that break-in campaigning comes at a bad time, as some opinion polls have suggested the government could lose control of Congress in the poll on October 27th. Also, this temporary replacement of Kirchner gives Vice President Boudou control, who is currently facing corruption allegations. The Vice President assumed the role of president once before when Kirchner was misdiagnosed with thyroid cancer in 2012. In the case of Kirchner's leave of absence, doctors say recovering from this type of surgery can take upwards of a month. Vice President Boudou said this week that what Cristina wants is for us to maintain the administration and to carry on this project that Nestor Kirchner began and that Cristina has continued. The suspension in campaigning and Vice President Boudou's investigation put Kirchner in what many are calling an awkward situation. The president's spokesman, Alfredo Scorchimano, said on Sunday that Kirchner's doctors had carried out a brain scan in August after a previously undisclosed trauma thought to have been caused by a fall. Kirchner's spokesperson also said she has suffered a previously undisclosed skull trauma on the 12th of August. Peter Kamen of the Inter-American Dialogue analyzes President Kirchner's illness in terms of what the results will be for the election. Kirchner is known to have low blood pressure and had her thyroid gland removed in 2012. Kirchner has been in the hospital multiple times since she assumed power after her husband Nestor Kirchner's death from a heart attack in 2010. This is Liza Bell from the Global Current.
Bill Golba reports on how shipwrecks in the Mediterranean have sparked an international debate on migration in the European Union.
Tragedy struck last Thursday off the coast of the Italian island of Lampedusa, as hundreds of refugees fleeing from Eritrea and Somalia through Tunisia were killed when their overloaded boat capsized. Of the more than 500 refugees on the boat, only 155 were rescued. Italian divers have so far recovered the remains of over 300 people from the wreckage, located less than a mile offshore of the Italian island, though it is believed that more bodies have yet to be discovered. Among the survivors is the captain of the vessel, 35-year-old Ben Salem Khaled of Sfax, Tunisia. According to Al Jazeera, Khaled has been charged by Italian authorities with causing a shipwreck, aiding clandestine immigration, and multiple counts of murder for his actions as captain. The tragedy off Lampedusa was followed by a similar event this Friday, as a second boat overloaded with migrants capsized in the waters between Tunisia and Sicily. This vessel, believed to be carrying about 250 passengers, was being tracked by a Maltese military aircraft, officials from Malta's military told CNN. The plane radioed that the boat seemed to be in trouble, and minutes later reported that it had capsized. The Maltese Rescue Coordination Center assumed control of the search and rescue operations and is being aided by the Italian military. Early reports indicate that at least 120 people have been rescued from the wreckage, but ANSA, Italy's official news agency, has reported that bodies have been spotted in the sea nearby. Illegal immigration is a growing concern in the EU. According to Frontex, the European Union agency charged with coordinating border management among the member states, some 70,000 migrants illegally entered the Schengen free travel area, comprised of most of the EU member states, in 2012. Of those, more than 10,000 made the often perilous sea voyage from northern Africa to Italy. Italian officials, speaking to Al Jazeera, claimed that number has already surpassed 30,000 this year. Italy has asked its wealthier EU partners to share some of the burden of dealing with this surge. It appears that these pleas have not fallen on deaf ears. Speaking in Lampedusa on Wednesday, European Commission President José Manuel Barroso announced the mobilization of €30 million to aid refugees across the EU. Not only is the EU looking to aid refugees in the 28-member bloc, but also to improve measures to prevent migrants from reaching European shores. EU Home Affairs Commissioner Cecilia Malmström addressed a meeting of the interior ministers of EU member states in Luxembourg on Tuesday.
I have proposed from the Commission side that we deploy a Frontex search and rescue operation, a wide operation that will cover the whole Mediterranean from Spain to Cyprus, in order to be able to prevent future catastrophes and save more lives. And I've asked Member States to give their political support and also make available the necessary resources.
To do so, EU lawmakers will have to reverse recent funding and staffing trends for Frontex missions. The BBC reports that Frontex has seen its budget fall from €118 million in 2011 to €85 million in 2013, and that there are currently only 4 ships, 2 helicopters, and 2 planes tasked with patrolling the entire southern Mediterranean. Italy has faced substantial criticism for its handling of the Lampedusa tragedy, including harsh words from Pope Francis.
Avvenuto oggi al largo di Lampedusa.
The word shame comes to me. What happened is shameful.
And while those who perished in the tragedy have been given Italian citizenship and promised a state funeral, the survivors' ordeal may be far from over. Speaking with Reuters, Italian prosecutor Ignazio Fonzo revealed that under Italian law, the migrants could be charged with a crime, fined €5,000, and deported with a criminal record, preventing any future legal immigration to the EU. Not all refugees face the same problems. Those with adequate assets can, in essence, simply purchase residency in some European countries. As reported in Der Spiegel, several EU member states passed special exemptions to their immigration laws in the wake of the financial crisis, granting migrants automatic residency if they make investments in real estate. While the size of the investment varies, from 500,000 euros in Spain to only 71,000 euros in Latvia, the message of these states, according to Spiegel author Klaus Hecking, is clear. Keep your tired, your poor, and your huddled masses. Only the rich are welcome. For Global Current, I'm Bill Golba.
This week in analysis, staffer Taylor Smith informs us on the conditions of migrant workers in Qatar in preparation for the 2022 World Cup.
When FIFA first announced that Qatar would host the 2022 FIFA World Cup, there were mixed feelings around the world. Critics cited that Qatar did not have the infrastructure nor the adequate climate required to host such a global event. But at that moment, the international sentiment was one of optimism and recognition of its historic significance. When Qatar hosts the 2022 World Cup 9 years from now, she will become the first Arab state to have ever hosted the highly acclaimed sporting event. This would be a critical moment for the whole Middle East, a region that has been rocked by the immediate aftermath and immediate aftershocks of the Arab Spring. However, issues are beginning to surface regarding Qatar's preparation process towards hosting the World Cup. The summer climate in Qatar has raised considerable concern. The average temperature during the summer is around 50 degrees Celsius, or 122 degrees Fahrenheit. According to The Guardian, the Union of European Football Associations' conclusion that you cannot play competitive sport in the 50 degrees Celsius heat of a Qatari summer will most likely signal a shift in the scheduling of the World Cup from the summer to winter. This would be unprecedented in FIFA's 107-year history. There is also significant corruption concerns regarding FIFA being bribed to accept Qatar's bid for the Games. Not to mention there are also concerns regarding alcohol consumption policy and whether the Qatari government will secure LGBT rights within Qatar. But the one concern that has been generating the most international media attention regards the status of workers and their working conditions on World Cup construction sites. For the past 9 months, reports have begun to emerge of near slave-like conditions for workers on the stadium construction sites in Qatar. CNN reported last month that migrant workers are forced to live in squalor, pushed to work in extreme heat, and go home to poor living conditions with anywhere between 8 to 12 people stuck in a room. According to The Guardian, the International Trade Union Confederation found that 83 Indian, 119 Nepalese, and another 202 migrant workers have died so far in 2013. To make matters worse, last month, the Qatari government announced that it will hire another 500,000 migrant workers to work on various sites in the country, meaning the death toll will surely rise by year's end. In fact, Sharon Burrow, the Secretary General of the International Trade Union Confederation, warns that if current trends continue, up to 4,000 migrant workers may die in Qatar by the start of the Games. The ITUC encourages that
to make their plan erase the exploitative situation that thousands of workers face.
In reaction to these accusations, Hassan al-Thawadi, the Secretary General of the Qatar 2022 Supreme Committee, stated, "I've had discussions with many representatives of the government at senior levels, and they've all indicated that there are investigations into this matter." Al-Thawadi elaborated further, stating that the Qatari government is seeking to ensure that it takes sustainable action, providing long-term, enforceable solutions rather than a quick fix to the migrant workers' problem. At the moment, Qatar's public relations has been focused on answering questions regarding the extreme summer climate conditions. Al-Thawadi voiced his concern to the BBC on October 3rd when he said,
"We're continuing with a Summer World Cup. And if the football community comes back and says they want to change the time, that's a decision the football community makes, and we will adhere to it."
What is apparent is that migrant workers are being denied their basic human rights, and this should be more of a priority for the Qatari government than whether the 2022 World Cup will be held in the summer or winter. Taylor Smith for the Global Current.
Staffer Valeria Gomez analyzes the implications of the government shutdown on the global economy.
In the wake of the government shutdown, many Americans have witnessed its ramifications, whether it has directly affected them or someone they know. The effects of the U.S. government shutdown are being felt not just at home, but across the globe. While many are focused on the closures of national parks and suspension of aid programs, one aspect of the shutdown is receiving little attention: the effect it is having on U.S. trading partners and foreign markets and how it could further harm the United States' reputation abroad. The annual meetings of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank took place this weekend in Washington, D.C. The effects of the U.S. government shutdown were surely on the agenda. Both the IMF and the World Bank are concerned that U.S. political gridlock is one of the greatest threats to the world's emerging economies. The continuing uncertainties about the U.S. budget and debt ceiling are damaging international markets. If the U.S. government is not able to raise the legal debt ceiling, the consequences will be irrevocable.
The ongoing political uncertainty over the budget, over the debt ceiling, does not help. The government shutdown is bad enough, but failure to raise the debt ceiling would be far worse and could very seriously damage not only the US economy, but also the entire global economy.
The IMF's managing director, Christine Lagarde, pointed out that a failure to allow a higher government borrowing limit would not only affect the American economy, but could also seriously jeopardize the global economy. Therefore, the central focus of the annual meeting this year will be U.S. political gridlock and a monetary exit strategy. The ripple effect of the government shutdown is being felt all over the world.
All these transitions, all these massive changes are not going to be fast, are not going to be easy. And the countries will likely spend the rest of the decade adjusting to the new reality.
China and Japan have expressed concern that the U.S. might default on its debt. If a default on U.S. debt occurs, there will be a huge impact on markets, said Yuichi Kodama, chief economist at Meiji Yasuda Life Insurance Company in Tokyo. Brazil and Mexico, two of the largest economies in Latin America, have seen their markets rise and fall respectively. The value of the Mexican peso fell, while currency in Brazil shot up. This divergence between the two countries is of extreme importance. The fact that Brazil managed to remain unscathed by the shutdown shows its economic independence on the world stage, while Mexico's stumble foretells what will happen to those economies with a huge reliance on the U.S. Throughout the rest of the world, the mood in financial markets was cautious. With investors scared, countries may share Mexico's fate. Exploring the effects the government shutdown has on foreign markets is vital to understanding future foreign policy and actions taken by the government. The fact that the U.S. debt limit is currently at $17 trillion is disheartening for many. Furthermore, the fact that analysts have calculated October 17th as the day the debt ceiling is reached means the government has little time to reach an agreement. If an agreement is not reached, international markets could collapse and the power of the dollar and U.S. government bonds could go into free fall. The fear still remains that a possible U.S. default will send shockwaves around global markets. This has been Laura Toledo for Valeria Gomez for The Global Current.
Finally, executive producer Laura Toledo speaks with retired Ambassador John F. Maisto about the state of U.S. Latin American relations. To hear the full interview, head over to blogs.shu.edu/globalcurrent.
Joining us now, retired Ambassador John F. Maisto, who served as the U.S. Ambassador to Nicaragua, Venezuela, and the Organization for American States. Ambassador Maisto currently sits on the board of multiple organizations, including the North American Research Partnership, the International Student Exchange Program, and the U.S. Education Finance Group. He also works as a consultant for Arizona State University and serves as president of the Philippine Society. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Ambassador Maisto. It's an honor to have you.
You're welcome.
So last month, there were two notable events that shone a light on the relationship between the United States and Latin America. First, Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff indefinitely postponed her state visit to Washington and used her opening speech at the UN General Assembly to criticize the U.S.'s practices of spying as a breach of international law. Then, weeks later, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro expelled American diplomats and the U.S. responded in turn. Are these happenings part of a trend of worsening relations between the U.S. and Latin America, or are they anomalies in what has generally been a positive relationship?
I think that both the Brazilian and the Venezuelan events that you mentioned are anomalies. And the reason is the following. In Brazil, there is a left-of-center populist government that puts a lot of political store in nationalism and sovereignty, and at the same time aspires to be the leading power of the of the southern hemisphere, as it were, and also aspires to presence on the international world stage through the United Nations as a possible member of the Security Council. The position taken by President Rousseff is completely understandable. in terms of Brazilian national sensitivities, the Brazilian internal political situation, not the least of which is the fact that there's going to be a presidential election next year, and the ever-present Brazilian sense of being the equal of the United States. Completely understandable in international affairs. But the Brazilian-U.S. relationship is much more than the bilateral government-to-government relationship. Relations are substantial: trade, investment, cultural, people, institutional, academic exchanges. The relationships are huge. This is a slight blow, in my view. It will pass. President Obama has gone out of his way to reassure President Rousseff, and time is a great healer in these things. In short, the relationship is much too important to allow something like this to get in the way. With regard to Venezuela, the latest effort by President Maduro to show Venezuelans that Venezuela is a sovereign country fail to impress or convince Venezuelans, Latin Americans, or anybody else in the world. The move is considered by and large to be completely absurd, and it is a shame that the diplomats were expelled. It sets back the Venezuelan-American relationship. But there's one final point I would wish to make. In spite of all the noise that comes from Caracas about the United States, in spite of the measures that different Venezuelan governments, whether that be President Chavez and President Maduro now, take, and the claims that the United States is doing all sorts of dastardly things, in spite of all of that, Venezuela has not stopped selling one barrel of oil to the United States, and will not. These antics don't fool anybody in Venezuela or beyond Venezuela.
You see. Now, you actually spent a lot of time in Venezuela along with Nicaragua during your post as ambassador there. What was the state of U.S. Latin American affairs during your time in these countries and then ultimately at the Organization of American States, the OAS?
Well, it is important to note that the state of relationships has an awful lot to do with what period we're talking about, and in both countries. I was in Venezuela in the 90s when Hugo Chavez was elected. It was a free and fair election, and Venezuelans were tired of the two traditional parties just interchanging power between themselves. One Venezuelan friend of mine called it a government of the parties, by the parties, and for the parties. So Chavez and some other candidates came along who were completely independent of the two parties, and Chavez was elected. The relationship with the United States was quite good. I was ambassador during the first 2 years of President Chavez's government, and we had reasonably good bilateral relations. We tried to resolve issues, and we resolved some. There was some cooperation on fighting narcotics trafficking. We talked about trade issues. We talked about investment issues. But President Chavez visited the United States twice while I was ambassador. I accompanied him, and he got a good reception among American audiences. It was really too bad that the forces of the extreme left seem to have captured him later, and he was convinced. They convinced him that, particularly during President Bush's administration, that we were doing involved in trying to take him out or down. We were not. I was certainly witness to that. That none of that was going on, but that's a belief. Nicaragua is a country that overcame the civil strife of the 80s and has gone the route of elected democracies since 1990. Nicaragua is doing well economically. Its political system is one that is working. Nicaragua is doing better than most countries in Central America in two areas. Number one, in terms of its economic performance, I would say three areas. Economic performance, financial stability, according to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And thirdly, in security matters. Nicaragua is considered to be the most secure country in Central America. The OAS is the Organization of American States. It is the equivalent of the United Nations of the Western Hemisphere. We dealt with issues dealing with democracy and human rights, the matter of sending election observation missions to individual countries. We dealt in a lot of cooperation that I consider below the radar cooperation that doesn't get a lot of publicity. Cooperation in environmental matters, matters of interchange of information with regard to narcotics trafficking, drug money laundering, terrorism, human trafficking. There is horizontal cooperation, which is really very, very important in the Americas, and other countries do benefit from that.
From everything that you're saying, it seems like there are a lot more ties between the U.S. and Latin America than modern media or general thought would have you believe. Do you see these just growing?
Oh, indeed. The strong relationships will continue. Why? Because of geographic proximity, geopolitical reality, the fact that there are trade and investment ties that grow stronger and stronger all the time, and there are people-to-people ties of all sorts. And Americans do travel to the region. I wish more Americans would travel because they would see a very vibrant part of the world that is growing. It's dealing with its issues. Keep in mind one thing. All the countries in Latin America are elected democracies. There's one exception. That's Cuba. Cuba's the outlier.
You mentioned what doesn't get covered is kind of the everyday cooperation agreements that happen between the U.S. and countries in Latin America. It seems that what does get covered is any agreement having to do with Russia, China, Latin America's shift to the Far East. Do you see this as a threat to U.S. interests or more as part of Latin America's right to self-determination in trying to grow their economies and spread their influence?
Good question. We're becoming a more globalized world. We have a huge revolution in communications. We have a huge revolution in terms of improved economic ties. So we have countries that are able to capitalize on their particular advantage in the economic world. In the Western Hemisphere, we have countries that are producers, that are agricultural producers, and who want to export more. These are vibrant countries, and with regard to China, Europe, taking advantage of their economic situations, this is natural in a free world. These offer challenges to the United States. We call it competition. We have diversified our economic relationships with all the countries of the hemisphere, in which we have a mutually beneficial situation. One example is free trade agreements that the United States has with key countries in the region with it. So we have vibrant trade. We have investment that goes in both directions, and so there's a world competing out there. And as Americans, I don't think we have anything to fear. The only thing we have to do is understand that there's competition there and work hard.
Well, thank you again, Ambassador Maisto, for joining us on The Global Current. It's been a very enlightening conversation, and we appreciate you taking the time.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank Thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of the Global Current. Check us out at blogs.shu.edu/globalcurrent.
And make sure you follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and SoundCloud. This has been Daniel Gaday.
And Amanda Noon for the Global Current.
We'll see you next week.